Hello everyone, Michael here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a camera comparison between the iPhone 13 Pro Max and the OnePlus 9 Pro. So on this year's iPhone Pro range there is no difference in camera hardware or software between the Pro and the Pro Max. They have identical camera systems, so the results of this video will apply to both phones. This video is split into chapters, so if you want to see any particular part you can skip along the bottom there, but I would make sure to watch all of it because it is quite fascinating and it would also help me out if you watch all the way through. So sit back and relax and let's start with some easy daytime shots using the main sensors, where both phones do a good job here. There's plenty of sunlight and both cameras pick up a good amount of detail, although if you really look down at the road you can already see the iPhone is picking up a few more details over the OnePlus. In this next shot, both again are very similar, with the iPhone producing more contrasty looks, crushing the blacks of my trainers, whilst the OnePlus has more of a flatter look, pulling out the shadows, and I guess whichever style you like will come down to personal preference. This shot straight into the sun is a real test of dynamic range, and both again do a good job in not blowing out the sky completely, but the iPhone does produce a much cleaner and richer image, controlling the light from the sun much better than the OnePlus, which gives a more faded look, which as we look at more photos we can see is a more common theme to the images on the OnePlus when dealing with difficult light. The OnePlus also had trouble keeping all parts of some photos in focus if the subject was close up. Whatever these bread things are, they look very soft on the OnePlus at the front of the picture, but sharp in the back, whereas the iPhone, in my opinion, chose all the right focus points, keeping the main subject nice and sharp. I will say though that on most occasions results on both phones do look very similar in broad daylight if it's a simple kind of shot. But when you do get further into the details, it's the iPhone that gives you an almost trouble-free shooting experience, making sure the entire picture, not just the main focus point, is captured correctly. And as we begin to lose light, the difference between the main sensors become more apparent. We are using the automatic night mode that kicks in on both phones and gives a longer exposure depending on what the camera judges the scene needs, so you can still take a quick snap in under 2 seconds for convenience, so you don't have to switch to manual night mode every time. And I have to say the iPhone is capturing way more detail than the OnePlus. It's not even close if I'm honest. But the other side of this is just the iPhone is really exceptional. It's probably the best camera system I've ever used in low light. I went out walking with my friend's dog, who is notoriously, famously difficult to take photos of just because of her color and texture. She usually ends up looking like a cloud, and the iPhone just nailed it, taking a quick snap in this dimly lit underpass, really crushing the OnePlus at every turn, which is crazy because I've always thought the OnePlus had a fantastic camera system, but its main sensor just cannot keep up with the new iPhone 13 Pro in harsher lighting conditions. However, if you do turn on the night mode manually and take a long exposure, it does get much better for the OnePlus. In this low light picture, I much prefer the colorscape and makeup of the OnePlus photo, with the iPhone losing a lot of the details in the tree line, and its choice of crushing the blacks really doesn't work as well as the OnePlus 9 Pro's more HDR looking shot. Again, in this shot, the OnePlus controls the lighting better than the iPhone in my opinion, bringing out more details in the trees and doing a better job of capturing the bright bulb of the lamp. So when you do give the OnePlus 6 or 7 seconds to capture and process a photo, it can do wonderful things, although these iPhone shots are taken in about half of that time. But it's not all champagne and caviar for the iPhone. The ultra-wide camera on the OnePlus has been fantastic for me this year, and I don't think there's been a better ultra-wide sensor on any phone. And this iPhone Pro is no exception, although in daylight again it's quite close between the two. In this shot the iPhone captures more details in the floor, but not as much as the OnePlus when it comes to the trees above, and overall I prefer the shot on the OnePlus 9 Pro. This next picture is very similar, although on the iPhone you can get more into the frame thanks to its wide field of view, but both do a great job in capturing details, with both phones carrying over their image styles from the main sensors, with the iPhone continuing to look more contrasty and the OnePlus having a flatter, more neutral tone, and if I'm honest, I do prefer the images that the OnePlus produces. It's not, however, until we get into lower light situations where the iPhone 13 Pro begins to fall behind the OnePlus. In this photo, it just cannot compete with the OnePlus, which handles the exposure and highlights much better than the iPhone and produces a more usable image, leaving the 13 Pro behind. And this continues into night mode, where both systems are able to use their dedicated night mode for the ultra-wide lens, but again, I do think the OnePlus captures a much nicer overall image, whilst the iPhone looks a little grainy and washed out. So for the ultra-wide photos, I'm giving this one to the OnePlus. It's still the king. Now if we swap over to the zoom lenses, the story changes again, as the iPhone is able to use its night mode and the OnePlus can't. And there is really no comparison. It's an absolute victory for the iPhone, with its images being cleaner, sharper, and full of more detail than the OnePlus, which really can't do anything without a dedicated night mode. So if you would like the flexibility to use the zoom feature at night, then it will be the iPhone all the way. In the daytime, things obviously get much closer depending on the lighting conditions, but it is again when the OnePlus faces a situation that doesn't provide perfect light that it falls down and loses a ton of detail compared to the iPhone, which produces much cleaner images. But when in good light, things do look very similar between the two, although there is always just a bit more detail with the iPhone sensors. Both phones have portrait photo and video. This photo was taken with both of the phone's closer settings, but the iPhone gets much closer to the subject as it uses its zoom lens and looks very natural, with the blur and edge detection fading nicely into the background, whereas the OnePlus looks a bit of a mess, if I'm honest, with over smoothing on the skin and a very harsh background blur. If we switch to the wider angles, I actually think the OnePlus does a better job in terms of details this time around, with the iPhone looking softer and smoother, but I still think the background of the OnePlus image looks less natural. If we switch to low light, there again is no competition between the two, with the OnePlus falling apart in pretty spectacular fashion. It just can't keep up with the amount of light the iPhone can let in.
Okay, so this is what the cinematic mode looks like on the iPhone 13 Pro. This is the first time they've used this feature, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so this is what the portrait mode looks like on the OnePlus 9 Pro. It's actually their kind of version of the cinematic mode. I actually use this to film my own YouTube videos in the talking head parts in my apartment, and it also shoots in 1080p, and this is what it looks like.
I'm going to sound like a broken record here and say the cinematic portrait video mode on the OnePlus does look decent, but only in good lighting conditions, which this is clearly not. The iPhone, on the other hand, considering this is Apple's first attempt, looks very good, and I don't think any other phone is going to come close to this in the next 12 months, and it's only going to get better.
Okay, so we're walking along shooting 4K 60 FPS. I'm walking quite steadily. Both phones look pretty stable to my eye. I'm going to go for a little bit of a quick jog. And pan around.
So some weird stuff there with the OnePlus, so I decided to drop it down to 4K 30 frames a second and go for another walk, and there was some more weird glitches. The video on the OnePlus 9 Pro has never been reliable, if I'm honest, and this probably has something to do with the phone being in direct sunlight, as the 9 Pro does tend to overheat when in the camera app. This year's Snapdragon 888 has been pretty terrible, so no surprise there. Video on the iPhones has always been class leading, and this year is no exception, with great quality all around. The OnePlus, when it's not overheating outside, does take decent video, but it's just not as clear as the iPhone, and the colors are a little off in the background, but it's definitely usable if the phone is up to it. A cooler nighttime environment suited the OnePlus much better, and it did produce brighter footage, but if I'm honest, it did look much softer compared to the iPhone, which was a lot sharper, had better stabilization, and captured a more realistic impression of what the scene really looked like with my own eyes.
So this is what the selfie camera video looks like on both phones. Unfortunately, on the OnePlus you can only shoot 1080p 60 frames a second, whereas on the iPhone you can do 4K 60 frames a second. So I don't think that's very good considering how much the OnePlus costs. It's still $1,000 phone. And overall, I can just see in the viewfinder that the iPhone quality is much better. I don't know if that's because it makes me look more tanned, but whatever. So if we pan up, we can really see the dynamic range in the sky there. Turn around, look at the sunset. The OnePlus has just completely blown it out. The iPhone looks great with the city behind me, and I think here a clear victory for the iPhone.
The macro lens shootout is here, and it's pretty much mix and match, with both phones using their ultra wides to take the photos. And honestly, they are trading blows in every picture, with sometimes the iPhone doing the best and then the OnePlus focusing and having more detail in another. The selfie camera has not been changed on this year's iPhone, but still looks decent and captures a warmer tone compared to the OnePlus that is a little cooler and actually captures my skin in a more realistic way compared to the iPhone. The iPhone, however, has the advantage of a wider angle option to capture more, which is good for selfies with friends, and I do think there is a little more detail in the iPhone shot. The OnePlus also does tend to smooth over my skin, which I don't like, and this is after I turned the beauty mode off, which isn't great. I also tried the portrait mode and, well, I think this one speaks for itself. And finally, a good old-fashioned nighttime selfie. I'll let you be the judge on this one.
So I am filming the final part of this video on the iPhone because it is the camera I would choose if I was shooting photography or a vlog or something like that. It just seems to be reliable in every situation. And as much as I love OnePlus phones, they are priced at $1,000 now, the same price as the iPhone 13 Pros. And for that price, I just can't justify recommending getting one. So thanks for watching. These videos do take a while to make, so a subscription would really be appreciated. And leave a thumbs up, a comment down below, because that really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.